Welcome to Livnot Live. I want to thank Livnot Lebanot for this opportunity and this talk. And we are dedicating this talk to this session to the recovery of a husband of one of our past chevra, her name is Jen Liebman. Her husband Ben was sick with the coronavirus, and although we understand he's doing better, he still needs our prayers. And his Hebrew name is Chaim Ben Sarah. This is dedicated to his complete and full and speedy recovery. I wanted to talk about my experiences in the Second War in Lebanon. Just a few words of introduction. The war that is now called the Second War in Lebanon took place for about a month. About 14 years ago in 2006, between July and August in the summer. It started when Hezbollah ambushed and killed 3 IDF soldiers and then kidnapped 2 of those dead soldiers. Israel tried to get them back and failed, attacked Hezbollah. Hezbollah fired missiles at Israel, and then the IDF invaded southern Lebanon until a UN brokered ceasefire was agreed on about 34 days after the war started. I also want to say my unit, my reserve army unit, is not in any way any kind of special forces. For simple, normal citizens, and anybody here on this talk could do what we did. And I mean that, I'm just not just saying it. And also in the beginning of the war, the more difficult things and the more dangerous things were given to the IDF standing army. 18 to 20-year-olds and young officers and professional special forces who did most of that stuff and were the first to enter Lebanon in order to stop the missiles. And the IDF reserves were people who do a few weeks of patrols a year. We're not usually in great shape. We have these beer bellies and our backs hurt. And that's the situation. We have families, we have jobs. We're just civilians. The only thing going for the reserves is that there's experience there. They're usually more mature. We've known each other for years, and we come because we want to and not because we have to. After I came back home, after a couple of weeks of being away during this war, I felt a little wonky. Felt very, very strange, even though I'd been in war before and nothing had happened. Something like a little motor going on in my stomach. I reacted strangely, and I didn't know exactly what was going on. And after discussing it with my wife, we decided that I would get some professional help with a psychologist who we both knew. And it turns out other people felt like I did also in my unit. And we had help from Army psychologists, but this kicked in a little later. And this woman told me that, in her opinion, we're not talking about PTSD here. It's just really battle fatigue. And the best thing that I could do would be to write down my experiences. So I did. I sat down. I just wrote 40 pages of just everything that I remembered. And I wrote it with a Livnot audience in my mind. It helped me be more focused on how I was writing. And when I finished, I was better. It was amazing. I was healed. Writing can do that, I learned. For this session, I whittled it down to about 1/3 of its size, and I didn't wanted to focus on the things we focus on at Livnot, which is Jewish values. And that's really what this talk is about, Jewish values, human values, and how that comes out during the war. So I didn't need any medication or treatment except for just sharing. And so this is also part of it. And I want to thank Livnot and all of you for helping in that way. Sometimes I cry when I read this, and it may happen now. And it's because I moved. I cried at a lot of things, not just war things or things that happened to me. And I've learned to be okay with that, not embarrassed. It's a good thing to cry. And that's what happens when there's something moving. And in war, there are very moving things that happen, certainly in this war. Part 1, the grandmas and the trees. I've been called up to my reserve army unit and told to go to Tiberias and wait there for the ride that would take me to my base. As the driver and another soldier and I were walking towards the car, the sirens went off again, which means that missiles were on their way from Lebanon into Israel, and the three of us scurried for cover. An elderly woman, perhaps in her mid-70s, was throwing out a garbage bag when the sirens went off, and she came towards me to look for safety, and I motioned to her to come over and join me. There are gas containers on the other side of this building, so let's stay on this side. Her eyes were open very, very wide, and it seemed as if she wanted to talk, but she simply couldn't. Then, right before we heard the nearby landings a minute later, she told me in near panic that she'd left her grandchildren alone and she had to get back as soon as possible. I talked to her, I tried to calm her as best as I could, and when all was clear, we parted, and it was as if we were old friends. And before she left, she put one hand on my shoulder and one hand she pointed to the north, and she said the following: "You go get them. This cannot continue. We cannot let this happen again. You go get them." The image of this frail elderly woman from Tiberias and her plea would be like a compass for me in the weeks to come. Over 200 rockets rained down that day on northern Israel. The folks that leave Note and Sfat were also under fire, and they were doing acts of chesed, keeping the city going, helping especially with the elderly. And I'd read about it, but after seeing it with my own eyes, it just drove home the point that somebody's got to go there and stop those meanies. At the base, people were mainly backslapping and hugging like people do when old friends see each other after a while. And our officers who'd been called up 2 days earlier told us the plan: 2 days of training, and then entering southern Lebanon on foot to clear out rocket launchers that had been raining down missiles on Israel. And the briefing they gave was like this: "This will not be a classic battle. We will essentially be going in to hide in strategic spots, hunt for launchers and terrorists with special equipment, and then come back out after 2 or 3 days. But because we'll be hiding and because transportation is too dangerous due to anti-tank missiles, do not expect outside assistance. We'll have to be totally self-sufficient. All the food and water and equipment that will be used, we'll have to take with us on our backs. And if you get injured, you should all know that it's possible that you'll have to wait until nightfall before you can get evacuated, even by helicopter." Some folks, after talking with their significant others and weighing the pros and cons, decided to stay in Israel and join the support crew, and nobody thought less of them. We were slated to enter Lebanon at nightfall on Saturday night. That didn't give us a lot of time to fix equipment, camouflage it, make it comfortable, and prepare. We practiced a lot and drove to an area where the foliage and the scenery and the landscape were very similar to Lebanon, and we acted out various scenarios: a surprise ambush, a minefield, a booby-trapped house, evacuating wounded, officers getting hurt and others taking charge, soldiers getting lost, and anti-kidnapping measures. The kidnapping idea of soldiers was a big priority for the Hezbollah, and there were new instructions on how to foil such actions. First and foremost, nobody was ever allowed to be alone. We were divided up into pairs in our platoon, and my spouse was a wonderful man named Ziv. Ziv used to be a furniture salesman until he decided to follow a dream and become a baker, which he's doing independently and very successfully in the Tel Aviv area. That's a picture of Ziv there. Ziv and I have been in the same platoon for close to 20 years. He's a true tzaddik. He loves to help people, and he can cook up a storm. Like all other couples, for the entire time we'd be in Lebanon, we were not to let each other get out of sight. Nothing was to separate us at any time. Night and day, peeing and eating, trekking and praying were all to be done together, no exceptions. This, of course, was a source of many jokes during the entire training time, as couples purposely walked around arm in arm, even in ridiculous situations. As time marched on, those were two things that really kept us sane, and that is humor and friendship. The only Shabbat-like things that happened on Shabbat were quick Shabbat-like meals with military chulent, if you can believe that. And of course, to start it all, The only Shabbat-like things that happened on Shabbat were quick Shabbat-like meals with military chant, if you can believe that. And of course, to start it off, Kabbalat Shabbat. Friday night, as the sun was setting, it was as if everybody came out of the little green rabbit holes to gather. Believers and atheists, men and women, officers and soldiers, black and white, head covered and bareheaded. We sang, we danced, we prayed, and a huge circle was formed. The mood was not joyous, but it was more spiritual and hopeful. I was amazed as I looked around. This is how the people of Israel prepare for war. Pray, hope, sing, and dance as one unified unit. Shabbat day was a time for more fieldwork, briefings, fixing equipment, catnaps, and making last-minute preparations. In the early afternoon, I was walking in the base and I saw a small notebook on the ground. It was something hastily prepared by the IDF for all commanders to have in their pockets during the war. There was background information on Hezbollah, rules and regulations, generic maps of important villages in southern Lebanon, and at the very end of the notebook was something fascinating, an entire chapter on ethical behavior in the IDF during combat, with quotes from a young commander who fell in Lebanon in 1997, Nadav Milo. I knew this young man, and so did Aaron. He was born and raised in Kibbutz Eliyahu. We often took Livnot birthright groups on hikes to the kibbutz and would stop by his gravesite where I would read some of the things that he wrote. And here, I was finding these same quotes in this notebook. The foundation of every soldier is the human being inside of him. In the army, sometimes this idea gets blurry, and we tend to do everything to be good soldiers and forget the main point. Before we teach soldiers to be good professionals, we need to educate them about human values. It's better to have a bad soldier in the unit than have a bad human being. I remember his funeral and the deep mourning that was felt by the entire kibbutz. His mother was my wife's music teacher, and everyone talked about how one day Nadav would go far up in the IDF. In a way, I felt after reading his familiar words, he really did. I was so inspired by Nadav's message that I kept this little notebook in my pocket until I returned home. And then I gave it to his parents. Saturday afternoon towards sunset, the buses arrived. We had a huge Havdalah ceremony. Soldiers got in circles according to their companies, smelled the scent, saw the fire, drank the wine, and everybody sang the song that all Livnot folks know, Kol ha'olam kulo, gesher tsar me'od, v'ha'ikar lo lefached klal. The whole entire world is a very narrow bridge, and the main thing to recall is to have no fear at all. We sang it at Livnot, and if we were singing it in the army, it meant we were scared to death. And that's a good thing. It's actually very healthy. Life is precious. It was a very moving moment, but it was over, and we got on the buses, and we headed up the mountain towards the border. I sat next to Daniel, a friend of mine, who was born in Russia. He was an artist. And we noticed a terrible smell. We looked out the window and we saw hundreds of pine trees burning thanks to a Katyusha barrage from Lebanon. I thought, it's not enough to kill people. You have to burn forests too? Or rather, when your hate for people becomes a burning inferno, it will not just stop with humans, it'll become an inferno for all living things. It was a very upsetting sight. Isn't it obvious to the world what's going on here? Evil people destroying human, animal, and plant life? That elderly woman in Tiberias was right. You have to go in there and stop this. Every additional moment that those people aren't stopped means death to innocent living things. To me, the arithmetic was simple. If you care about the sanctity of human life, you have to act like a doctor who performs an operation. Sometimes you have to cut off a limb to save a life. Ethical soldiers sometimes have to stop, maim, or even kill terrorists in order to save innocent lives. The Talmud said it so beautifully and simply. One who is kind to the cruel is actually being cruel to the kind. Most of our lives should be spent in kindness, but there are times when, for brief moments, we have to put kindness on the back burner. Otherwise, we're in danger of being too naive and causing damage to the innocent. It's called balance. And afterwards, I realized that, no, this wasn't obvious to the world at all. Near the border, we got off the buses with our gear. Last bathroom stop, Last cigarette, none allowed in Lebanon. Last cell phone calls, no phones allowed in Lebanon. We put all of our phones and tobacco in a wooden box and gave it to our support unit who would be assisting us on the Israeli side. Last bite to eat before we enter. Everybody checked everybody else for anything that might be shining, watches, earrings, jewelry, equipment zippers, etc. Camouflage makeup kits were taken out, and the few folks who knew what they were doing started painting our faces. We laughed at each other's frog-like faces and then marched over to the fence. That's actually me looking like a frog there. The battalion commander spoke to us before we went in. We have two missions here, he said, to make sure our task is accomplished militarily and to make sure we all get back home safely. I want you all to know that while we're inside Lebanon, I will think 100 times before giving any orders. Be responsible and do what you have to do as best as you can. And remember, we're doing this for our own homes. I am very proud to be leading you all. Shalom. The battalion rabbi, yes, there is such a thing, but he was also a soldier, led us all in saying the Shema. It was also a moment. It actually transcended religion. It was a very Jewish, but also a very human moment. We hugged each other. We got our gear on. We started marching. We walked right through an empty patch in the border fence. That's it. We were in Lebanon. I said a silent prayer and I looked back one last time. Two images were engraved in my mind. The burning forest and its smell, and that elderly woman in Tiberias and her words. This cannot continue. We cannot let this happen again. You go get them. Yes, I thought, this is why we're here. We're doing this for them. We're doing this for the grandmas and the trees. Part 2, Rab Taratin. 2 days later, we arrived at our new hideout town, Rab Taratin. Southern Lebanon was a ghost town. There were literally no civilians left. They all fled northwards. Not a light was on in all the land. In the wee hours of the night, a bit before dawn, we arrived at the village. A few minutes later, we arrived at our group of houses. The companies and then the platoons split up according to prearranged plans, and we met our house, a very modest and unassuming house with a garden on each side. The lead soldiers checked the houses with their night scopes and made sure they were safe, and our platoon entered. We divided the rest of the night into shifts and started guard duty until further notice. We had arrived first into the village, but the companies behind us were still locating their own houses. So we'd have to wait until the entire battalion was settled in before anybody started to go rocket hunting. We were just beginning to get comfortable, and then it started. A rocket tore into our neighborhood and exploded. Gunfire was fired at us. I remember thinking, hey, somebody's trying to kill us. We hit the ground and heard the commander of our company, Olive Company, yell over the radio, "We're under fire and I'm directing return fire." The shooting was coming from the opposite side of our house, so our room had no angle. Soldiers from other units who were still outside started shooting too. As always, it was so unexpected. I was totally caught unaware, and my first reaction was to shake. My entire body started shaking. I remember looking down at my leg and seeing it move really strangely. After a few seconds, I got over it, got back to normal, and stuck my nose out the window on our side of the house and used the night scope to check for any surprises. But the shooting didn't stop. I started muttering a prayer. I made it up on the spot, and I remember it well. It went like this. Hashem, please let our bullets hit their mark and make their bullets miss. It's a very simple, foxhole-ish prayer, and it may sound trivial, but it was straight from my heart. As time went on, I had to change this prayer. We were in a strange situation. Our mission was to settle into houses silently and stay there undetected so we could find what we were looking for. So returning fire might help you in the short run, but could hurt you in the long run. Nobody in our house opened fire during this first attack. Not only might it give away our spot, but unless you know exactly at whom you're shooting, you should never shoot. Instances of friendly fire, known in Hebrew military slang as dutzim, are often as dangerous and harmful as any enemy. I had personally been witness to a number of such incidents in the past. Being an effective soldier is also knowing when not to shoot. During that first volley of fire, our platoon commander, Ronnie, who had just gotten married a couple of months ago, had also hit the dirt. He silently said to himself, "Get up and do your job. Come on, get up." He was torn between lying down in safety and getting up and leading the platoon. At that very moment, he later told me, he thought how much he loved his wife. It was that got him up and moving. Yes, love can do that. That company was to occupy houses down the street from us with a good view in a different direction. The company commander was checking out the house, which was to be his own. It turned out to be, of all places, the local Hezbollah headquarters. As he carefully crept in, a man asked him in Hebrew, "Would you like some oranges?" This is a line that's often used to prove Jewish identification, since most Arabs cannot pronounce the letter P. And in Hebrew, the line goes, "Rotze tapuzim." Tapuz is an orange. But the man asked in almost perfect Hebrew. He opened the door between them, and he walked towards the commander, shooting from his gun and throwing grenades at the same time. And then just a miracle happened. The commander was unscathed, and he shot the orange man, who turned out to be a Hezbollah commander in the headquarters. It was quite a strange incident, but totally miraculous. Soon it was dawn. Shooting was going on all the time. Since only one or two groups go out at once on missions to allow better command and control of units and to minimize dutzim, there's Toranut, something that all Leave Note folks know, a rotation. We, Aleph Company, led the battalion to the village last night, so it was decided that Bet Company would be sent out on the first mission. Find the source of fire and stop it. We would be designated rescue team if anything bad happened, so we had to be on top of things. Moreover, our house had a great angle on the village, and we could funnel information to our Bet buddies that could be of great value. Bet Company moved out. This is actually a picture of them as they were moving out. They left their houses from various doors and windows, sometimes only two at a time, so the terrorists wouldn't know exactly where they were hiding. They converged and moved slowly towards the center of town, where most of the shooting was coming from. An IDF tank appeared out of nowhere to give them cover. As they all converged on the center of town, the terrorists started shooting with everything they had: machine gun fire, grenades, anti-tank rockets. I was doing guard duty in our room, and a rocket hit the hill right in front of me and exploded. The guard is expected to report to others around him what he sees and what's going on. I whispered as loud as I could so everybody could hear, "Rocket explosion 15 meters to the south of the house on the hill." And the big question was, did they discover our house? Or is it just a missed rocket that was being shot at Bet Company? The answer seemed to come from the alleyway next to me. I could clearly hear someone trying to tiptoe towards us. This is it, I thought. It's time to shoot and kill. None of our soldiers were outside in the area, so it had to be terrorists. The other people in the room were staying as low as possible, and I kneeled and pointed the barrel of the gun towards the screen of the window facing the alleyway. The footsteps came closer. It was one, perhaps two people, and they were trying unsuccessfully to walk quietly. The footsteps came closer. The safety of my gun was off. I aimed lower than usual, thinking that the person would certainly be advancing in a crouch as they approached our window. 3, 2, 1, and I was just about to pull the trigger. As soon as this black and white figure came into my sights, I realized that I was about to shoot a cow. A big black and white cow was slowly passing in the alleyway, looking for food, and turned its head towards the open window, looking right into my face. I was half a second away from firing. And of course, I whispered, yelled, "Cow!" And everybody in the room just broke into whispering laughter. Soon, the entire house joined in with this whisper laughter. After that, we realized what would have happened if I'd actually shot her. Her huge body would be lying right in front of our house, which would be a dead giveaway that we were in the house. And it would stink to high hell too. Whew. At this point, some people needed to use the bathroom. At the entrance to the bathroom, the sergeant had posted a handmade sign. A Hezbollah sentry was seen recently in the minaret of the mosque right next door to us, so pee quietly. Meanwhile, something amazing was going on at the same time in the room of our house facing the center of town. as our commanders and binocular schlepping folks and snipers were carefully watching the advance of Bed Company towards the terrorists. They ingeniously spotted the main group of terrorists hiding next to the main village mosque. Avi, our platoon sniper and an accountant in civilian life, had his sights. In his sights, he had the terrorist commander. He could clearly see him. In one hand, he had a machine gun, and in the other, he had a cell phone. He was standing above the group of terrorists and waving them down towards Bed Company as if to say, go down and attack, forward, attack. And he stayed back. It was the antithesis of everything we had ever learned and done in the IDF, where commanders lead by example and not by proxy. And it said a lot about Hezbollah and their ideology. This is a picture of Avi and Ozzy while this is happening. Avi had the number 2 sniper, Ozzy, join him. And for half an hour, they'd been scanning the area for just a scene like this. Meanwhile, Bed Company reported over the radio they were being attacked by gunfire and rockets. And we were watching it happen on both sides. Avi asked the commanders for the green light to fire, and he got it. Avi and Ozzy, as they had done so often in training, counted down together in a whisper. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, Esh. All of us in the house could hear just one shot being fired. That's how good they were. The idea was to give the impression that there's just one sniper. The men in the room quietly let out an expression of relief when they saw that the terrorist commander fall back into his chair, dead. This broke the attack on our friends of Bed Company, who immediately were able to move forward and upward, since the terrorists that were being sent by their leader found themselves leaderless and ran back up towards the mosque. Bed Company couldn't see them, but we could. Our commanders were talking directly to the tank by radio and directing them towards the terrorists. Some of them ran into the mosque. We reported this to the tank hit the mosque. Some of them ran behind the water tower, and the tank hit the water tower. A helicopter with heavy guns came by, and we directed its fire too towards the terrorists. This lasted for about 1 minute. And then we heard the pilot say over the radio, "Sorry, I've just been called to another mission," and he left. And everybody just, as if to say, so much for the Air Force. But inside, people knew that there were more serious cases of warfare going on in Lebanon than this. We called in artillery fire on the remaining terrorists, but Bed Company was out of danger. We weren't getting fired on, and it seemed like everything was perfect. The probe fulfilled its mission. The mouse in the house situation of the soldiers paid off big time, and none of our soldiers had been hurt. Time for lunch. Everybody was entitled to 1 piece of bread with an option, either jelly or sardines. And like Pooh, I went for both. I'd seen Chevra do this on Livnot Tiulim, so how bad could it be? A good friend of mine, Amir, as the local supply sergeant, was passing out the bread, but the look on his face, he simply always smiled usually, was not the normal one. When he finished passing out the bread, I went up to him and whispered, "Are you okay? What's going on?" He took me aside and said, I don't know how we're going to let the rest of the guys know, but yesterday this huge tragedy happened to us in Israel. The Katyusha rocket scored a direct hit on our battalion supply camp in Kfar Giladi, and 12 of our soldiers died, and some are seriously injured. I'm afraid what's going to happen to morale if somebody finds out. I asked about Sammy. He lost an arm, but he's alive. I asked about Khalfon. He shook his head. Bed Company lost their supply sergeant. The entire battalion supply corps is in disarray, and the Olive Company support crew is saving the day. I gave him my opinion. You might as well just tell everybody, but in a soft way. In today's world, you can't hold back news. They're going to hear it to the grapevine, and then they can only lead to misinformation and even worse morale. The casualties were righteous people, people who had the patience of Job, handing out supplies and not always getting thanked. And moreover, many of these people did not feel they should be in Lebanon because of safety and family issues. How profoundly sad it was that it was they who would get hurt. While the commanders were deciding how to break the news to the soldiers, Amir and I were looking around the house. Above the front door was a panel of glass, which is mostly broken by the shaking of the numerous explosions of the past few days. Underneath it, we found a tea service. We found the sugar bowl, but there were pieces of glass in it. Glass. So we picked out the pieces. I tried the sugar. It was great. I put some in my water bottle, went around offering it to others too. It was like heaven. There was no electricity in all of southern Lebanon all the time, but we did find a video machine in the salon. No TV though. Perhaps they took it with them when they fled. On the shelf above it was a Quran, and we found a few more Qurans in the house. Perhaps it was a religious family. We found a diary, totally empty. Amir flipped to the current date and wrote a short message and asked me to check the English. Dear family, any damage we did here was done in order to stay alive. We put the diary back and then found below it a Hezbollah magazine. This was horrific. They were trying to interest kids in joining Hezbollah as well as trying to get adults to donate money to the cause. All you need to do is read this magazine to understand that Hezbollah is not just like Israel, except the other side of the coin. We're talking apples and oranges here. There were two main kinds of pictures in this magazine. Those of Israeli soldiers crying at funerals, and those of body parts of Israeli soldiers killed by Hezbollah. It was gross. It was obscene, it was pathetic, and it was evil. I was reminded of the black and white pictures of Nazis parading around Germany, dragging Jews like bags. And these Jews weren't even alive anymore. How can you do this to educate kids? How can they have so much hate? How can you send peons into battle while commanders sit back and direct military traffic? How can you hollow out a person's face and march around Beirut holding it with your bare hands like a Halloween mask? Hashem, why is there so much evil in the world? I got up and decided to go over to Avi, the accountant sniper, to see how he was doing. And I found him sitting with his head in his hands, crying. Avi, what's up? And he said to me, I killed a man. I never killed a person before. Both Ozzy and I shot at the same precise moments, and that's great. But so no one will know for sure who would hit what, but I actually know that my sniper's rifle bullets travel faster than his, so I know for sure that I killed him. I've lessened this world of the human life. And my wife, she's in her 9th month, pregnant with our first child and due to give birth any day now. I took a life, but I'm bringing life into the world. And I thought to myself, what a mensch. How honored I was to be with Avi in the same unit. How typifying his words were of the IDF. Hezbollah terrorists parade around with Jewish body parts, send their soldiers alone into battle, and ridicule the IDF wimps that cry at their friends' funerals. And yet IDF soldiers killed terrorists in self-defense and then asked themselves, was that okay? Avi knew logically that it was okay. He had no regrets about shooting that terrorist, but he still checked himself to see if he acted ethically. He was listening to his sensitive heart. This is the idea. The platoon commander gathered everybody together towards the main hallway. He dropped some bombshells of his own. Guys, listen up, 3 things. I have to give you some bad news about our friends in the supply unit. Last night, a Katyusha rocket made a direct hit on our supply camp in Kibbutz Kfar Giladi. 12 soldiers were killed and many injured. This is a list of their names. We can't leave here and go to their funerals, but we'll have a lot of support to give their families when we finally get out of here. And our own guys in Olive Company support crew are doing their best to make sure the entire battalion can run normally in the interim. Ronnie waited for the list to make the rounds for the news to sink in. And now for the other matter. As you can see, there's a lot of work to be done here and in other villages. We might be staying a bit longer instead of going back to Israel. I want you all to make the switch in your heads. We might very well have to stay here a few more nights, maybe even a week. Nobody really knows for sure, but I want you all to realize that's a good possibility. I know it's hard to digest that, but that's the way it is. Our support unit has personally called every household in the company and let them know that things are fine, all is well here, and we might very well be staying here longer than we'd initially planned. And he let that sink in too. And lastly, tonight we're going to be leaving Rabbi Taratin to go to another hideout village for more search and destroy missions. Okay, thanks for your attention. Yofi, I thought, we're out of here. I was thrilled. This place gives me the creeps. Even today, when I hear the words Rabbi Taratin, I shiver for a moment. And to be outside is where I belong. Bushes beat walls any day. Finally, we'd be able to leave this place. 5 or 6 times, we were really in mortal danger in Rabbi Taratin, but we found missiles and rockets. This is actually a picture on the left of launchers that were found. Many on launching pads ready to fire, and had destroyed some of the terrorist infrastructure in the town. Now we were counting the few more hours of light before we'd be leaving our temporary home. Earlier in the day, in the heat, literally, of the recent battle, people started sweating profusely, but we only had a limited amount of water. The sergeants went around and made a bottle count. We opened one bottle for the entire house of 33, and we passed it around. Everybody got 2 sips on the first round and 2 sips on the second round. Nobody even thought about germs, of course. And nobody got sick during our entire time in Lebanon. But we were thirsty. And I realized, and so did Ziv, who was a medic, that I was so thirsty that I was breathing a little weirdly. I needed to drink a lot of water and fast. I felt like I was losing it. My sanity. I had no idea that thirst can do that, but it can. It turns out that others felt on edge too. And then, like the children of Israel in the desert, a miracle happened. We found a water source, a cistern in our home that just appeared. It was literally a miracle. The medics drew some water, popped in some iodine pills, waited, and checked. It was potable. Yay! We drank a bunch of bottles of our own old water and then started a little factory of drawing water, filling bottles, inserting iodine pills, waiting, marking the bottles as potable, and then piling them up. Our neighboring soldiers in other houses near us were slowly dehydrating too. And it would be a matter of time till somebody would dehydrate and then need evacuation, which couldn't be promised. We mentioned over the radio to our 2 sister units that we found a potable water source and that we would be bringing over water soon. In normal times, this would be a simple logistical mission only, but here in Al-Taratin, with shooting going on nonstop for hours now and terrorists still roaming the streets, bringing water from one house to another would be a full-fledged military operation. Ziv and I volunteered for the first run. After all, we hadn't really done much until then. After having a quick organizational meeting before leaving, we both took a kit bag of water bottles on our shoulders and radioed all local units that we'd be arriving soon with a strong reminder to notify all sentries in the area to prevent any incidents of friendly fire. At that moment, we were informed that there would be a heavy artillery and airstrike at the center of town where terrorists had just been spotted by a nearby unit and the tremendous explosions rocked the village. The commander held us back for a minute, but I said to him, "This is the best time to go. When they'll have to take cover and fear for their lives, they won't be caring about petty water carriers." So 2 soldiers left the house and went left, 2 soldiers left the house and went right, and Ziv and I, just like in football, went right up the middle with our duffel bags. We double-checked by radio that all the sentries knew of our presence. The explosions rocked the ground. It actually made us feel safe. After 3 acts of advancing and then taking cover, we arrived at the first house. The thirsty soldiers were so happy to see us. We hadn't seen these guys in a few days, and it was like homecoming. We all hugged and quickly exchanged bottles. We gave them the full ones, and we took their empty ones. We then went to the next house and did the same. In that house, we saw guys drinking hot coffee. Coffee? How did they do that? Here? Coffee? How's that possible? Simple, they said. We found it in the pantry. Ziv and I looked at each other. Why didn't we think of that? When we got back to our house, we went straight to the pantry, and we found coffee and olives and olive oil. We had respect for the house and its inhabitants. We did our best not to mess up their kitchen, but we did decide to drink their coffee and their olives and use their olive oil. And I have to add, coffee is not just coffee, it's comfort. And we were so hungry, we could eat a cow and our meals were 1 piece of bread. So we helped ourselves, and our meals suddenly became dreamlike. This is an actual picture of what we ate. Bread dipped in olive oil and spices, bread with olives, bread washed down with great Arab coffee, which we drank in tiny cups so there would be enough to go around for everyone. But then I thought about the ethical implications of eating food that didn't belong to us. I touched my shirt pocket with my hand and I thought, what would Nadav have done? Were we being good soldiers and bad people? Or were we acting just fine under these extreme circumstances? I believe the question itself is more important than the answer. Nadav, who was no longer alive, was very much alive inside of me. I had with me yet another compass. Continuing with the rest of the story, but I did want to mention something at the end. We're now actually in a war too. This war against the coronavirus has many parallels to a military war. We can't see the enemy. We try to stay safe, even though we don't have total control over who shall live and who shall die. It could happen to any of us. Also, this war attacks our sanity. Things that were obvious and everyday suddenly become impossible or rare. We begin to value things that perhaps we didn't value enough beforehand. Family, home, food, health, community, the elderly, love, warmth. And we can only hope that all who are sick will become healthy, and we will leave this battle stronger, wiser, and more ethical. Again, Jewish and human values are at the forefront here. It's at the core of everything going on. Thank you.